From Los Angeles, Rethinking Heroes with Cary Harrison.
I've spent a decade taking a bite out of conspiracy theories, unraveling urban legends, and grappling with worldwide top secret issues.
I've even racked up some of their awards.
Wow, I mean, first of all, what a question.
Journalism is about telling the truth, all while ferreting out the bottom line.
I'm a Harrison Hellraiser.
With me, Cary Harrison, as your guide.
Rethinking Heroes with Cary Harrison.
This is Rethinking Heroes with Cary Harrison. Welcome. Happy Friday to you. And of course, it's always awesome to be here on public radio with you. Those of us, the millions of us, 87% of people still listen to radio, and you are one of them. Well, I'm going to now paint an image for you. I want you to imagine, and we've all been paying attention to global politics in the last week. We've seen horrific things pop up left and right, and we scratch our heads and say, this can't be. Not the whole planet. Imagine a dangerous network of governments and far-right actors working together to roll back human rights. Now, this is not a conspiracy theory, but a reality that's been hiding in plain sight. These groups have been meeting regularly, sharing ideas and strategies to undermine democracy. And it's not just happening in one country, but across borders with a coordinated effort to spread hate and intolerance. Take Hungary, for example, a place that I visit every year. I do cultural tours there, and grit my teeth. For example, Hungary, the government has been dubbed an electoral autocracy. Viktor Orban he comes to the United States and addresses CPAC and tells them how to get rid of the LGBT, get rid of this, put the blacks back in chains. That guy, he is the head of Hungary. So let's take him. Its government has been dubbed an electoral autocracy by the EU Parliament, the Parliament of the European EU. Yes, that one. Yet, it's still a member of the EU. Even with all of his anti-LGBT, anti-foreigners, brutality, the EU still allowed him to stay a member. Now, Hungary is set to become president of the Council of the European Union next month. Now, that's like putting the snaggle-toothed fox in charge of the pheromone-wafting henhouse. Think about that. Thankfully, however, there are heroic organizations like the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism that have been tracking these far-right conferences. And the numbers are so staggering. Get this, over 300 conferences in the last decade with over 3,000 attendees. Now, these events they're breeding grounds for hate speech and anti-democratic ideologies. When I say hate speech, you probably don't know what that is. You're thinking Orwell, as I was taught to think Orwell. Hate speech doesn't mean that anymore. It's not just limited to Europe. These networks are now spanning across borders with high-level politicians, think tanks like the Heritage Foundation, all of them participating. This horse is so long out of the barn, yet I'd like to think it's not too late for any of us to wake up and pay attention to this now multinational far right-wing network. Network, as in far-right organizations tethered together around the planet. They communicate together, they plan together, they organize together. And they are moving these sorts of politicians, our grandfathers and great-grandfathers, the same kinds of politicians they fought in World War II against. Those politicians. Well, these politicians are being rounded up, marshaled, and put into power, moving them around the planet into places where they can do what they wish. We have our own version of that. He was president one, if I want to say generation, it feels like it, ago. And as already said, he gets in. He's going to do what Vladimir Putin did and take a 4-year term and turn it into a 36-year term. Of course, you don't have to go to prison if you are a perpetual president or a PP, as we like to call it in adult land. So we're dealing with actors, holding these actors accountable and protecting human rights. Human rights, not a concept now. Sometimes it's a good idea to remember that you and I are the actual humans about whom those rights exist. When you're watching the news, it's, hordes of people being thrown left and right, dislocated by climate change or war. You don't know them personally. It's hard to remember that those humans are actually part of you. You also, Homo sapien, we the people. Now, my ancestors, the founding fathers of this country, dedicated their hearts and souls to the spirit of this concept. And now, for real, the fate of our democracy depends on it. So I want everyone who's under the age of 40, listening to this online or watching any of my videos on TikTok or listening on an audio stream, to share this with your peers. And what you're about to learn and hear is not on any other mainstream media. And so many younger people feel so completely and utterly hopeless. And I'm here to let you know, you hold the power. Let me introduce Wendy Vai, a renowned expert in the intersection of technology and far-right extremism, a champion for civil and human rights with 2 decades of experience in high-impact philanthropy, policy advocacy, and storytelling. Wendy's been instrumental in exposing hate and extremism and driving lasting change. She's the co-founder of the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism and has advised members of Congress, governments, and tech companies. Wendy Vai, welcome to Rethinking Heroes.
Thanks very much for having me. It's good to see you.
Did I set up a grim enough stage for you?
You did, and you also did it really well. The one thing I want to comment on is that when you said this is not a conspiracy theory, it sounds like a conspiracy theory. When we talk about how these organizations have been planning, meeting, sharing ideas, campaigning together for decades. And it used to be that they would kind of do it on the sly or not make a big deal about it. But now globally, all of these groups are extremely, extremely open and defiant about what they plan to do.
Let's start by helping everyone remember what we mean by the word hate, because there's millions of listeners and viewers that hate ketchup or they hate the Three Stooges. We're not talking about that, are we?
No. What we're talking about is a sentiment that demonizes, dehumanizes, rejects somebody for an immutable characteristic. And in this case, when we talk about far-right governments or think tanks that are organizing to strip rights from these communities, they do it with a very specific purpose and a very specific plan. So it is not, I hate ketchup. It is that I believe this community of people does not deserve the same rights as other communities.
And, you know, recently in Spain and other places, some of these big meetings have taken place where many of us are familiar with what used to be called the Bilderberg Group and all the big brouhaha around that. That was more of a globalism thing. It was maybe a code for anti-Semitism, sort of a different era, a different time. But this is, let's just say, the real version of this, where we have giant multinationals, CEOs, people at the top positions getting together and really planning to change the world into Heinrich Himmler's wet dream. And I say that because that's exactly what I'm seeing. You're seeing it eyes in, I'm seeing it from the periphery. But even in places like Spain, which of course notoriously had Franco during World War II, we had Mussolini in Italy, every country, Germany, of all the places that has some of the best human rights in the world, also has some of the largest resurgence of what we would call neo-Nazis. And this is happening right this second with elections even unfolding in front of us.
That's exactly right. And for those of us who monitor these things, you would never think that you would see this kind of activity in Germany. Right now, the Alternative for Germany, the second most powerful party in Germany, has its roots in neo-Nazism. It has been, the federal government has received permission to watch it because of their anti-democratic activities. They have a youth wing called Young Alternative that engages in hate crimes. They are also being watched by the government. And and they're talking about something called remigration, which is the idea that it's it's an ethnic cleansing. And to hear this kind of talk out of Germany is astounding. But what they want to do is to send back anybody of non-European descent. And that doesn't mean an immigrant. It could mean somebody that's been in Germany for generations.
Well, and who better than the Germans to actually pull it off successfully? Let's just acknowledge that right here. It would still be somewhat experimental for the United States, even though we were able successfully to put children in cages, split them up from their families, disappear a whole lot of them, and much other execrable behavior that we hadn't really done in history, not since the slavery days. But, the Germans are very sensitive. So we have to remember one thing, and I think I'd love to get your thoughts on this. A friend of mine, a German friend of mine, he's probably 55, 60. His mother was a Nazi. She's over 80. All people over 80 grew up in the Third Reich. You couldn't opt out. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not going to go to Nazi finishing school. I'm going to go to a private school that has nothing to do with the party. Where is that located, by the way? It's not. So everybody who's alive over 80 had to go to Nazi school, grew up in the Nazi thing. Yes, it all changes. They have somewhat evolved. His mother is a decent woman, but she hates his guts, but loves him dearly because she's his son. Why does she hate her son? He's gay. He's a homosexual. And she sat in classrooms day after day after day being taught about homosexuals and Jews, which she also hates to the core. So 1/3 of Germany right now is already baked in with this kind of thinking. And who do you think's voting for alternatives for Germany? Not 15-year-olds.
That's right. Not young people, except for what is, equally disturbing is that one of the things that far-right political parties are very, very good at, and that is in this country and in countries around the world, they are very good at using social media to present themselves in a very engaging way. And so we are seeing some young people moving towards the more conservative. And let me say this, there is a difference between conservative and far right. We are not talking about disagreements over policy, over tax policy, anything like that. We're talking about a real plan to separate certain communities from the populace in order to create fear, in order to get more control of a country. And they know that going after young people is the way they have to do it. So while we do not have young people engaged in the way that we would like, there is a growing movement.
Cary Harrison with you. This is Rethinking Heroes, rethinkingheroes.com, where you're going to get a free video to see Daniel Ellsberg never before seen documentary where he talks about the perils of nuclear war. Remember the Pentagon Papers, all of the hidden this, the hidden that. It was really the last time he spoke to a camera. He's now been gone for 1 year. This is a must see. If you go to rethinkingheroes.com, our way of acknowledging you for listening to this show, you're going to be one of the few elite exclusives that get to see this, that will also help paint the picture of what we're talking about. And we are talking to Wendy Vai, a renowned expert in the intersection of technology and far-right extremism, a champion for civil and human rights with 2 decades of experience in high-impact philanthropy, policy advocacy, storytelling. She's been instrumental in exposing hate and extremism, driving lasting change, co-founder of the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism, and has advised members of Congress, governments, and tech companies. And Wendy, you talk about technology and the internet, and really take away the internet, and this thing grinds to a sudden halt. How much of a contributor is modern technology and the internet to all of this?
I would say it's the single largest contributor to the growth of far-right extremism across the globe. The technology companies supposedly have policies that will prevent provocative, that's probably not the best word, but content that would radicalize or encourage people to think in a less inclusive way. They have policies to do it, but when you exempt all the political figures in the world from those policies, then you give them a platform that they would never have been able to get otherwise. Because in many of these countries, you're not allowed to do television advertising like we are in the United States. Some can't even do radio advertising. And so they use the internet or social media companies to achieve their ends.
And what happens is their end gets met because a lot of people, whether they're incels or just lonely, and we have lonely people of every stripe, people who live on Facebook just to see what you had for lunch and then comment on it. But these are people who feel disenfranchised. So it's a different kind of appetite. It's one that really requires you to eat. And if you've been told over and over again, let's just take our former president. It's hard not to reference him sometimes in these discussions, but he would remind white men that they are a disappearing population and that they have a God-given purpose to colonize and control the planet as they have been for thousands of years. And I was talking to a friend of mine. I said, well, what's your take on this? He said, well, it's simple. I haven't been advertised to in 10 years. I watch ads. Even the Ford F-150 trucks are not driven by rugged, fat-jowled cowboys anymore. They look like, well, people that go to the gym. I don't see myself in magazines. I'm not in movies. I'm not the leading man. I'm not this. I'm not that. And he said, and so President Trump is giving me permission to take back my power. And I mean, I get it intellectually, like I get that, but you also have to believe that you have a right to more power than anyone else. And in this country, believe it or not, we're supposed to be equal. And the spirit of that is worth celebrating. And this country and other countries around the world right now are trying to, and the plot of the play here is not to have far-right activity in the streets. It's so a tiny bunch of bank robbers can walk away with all the loot. And that's what we saw in World War II. We saw tunnels full of trains, full of art, full of gold, full of this, full of that. It was a small bunch of bank robbers that got, a third of the human population to play along and make it work for them. It is the most obscene kind of grifting that I've ever seen.
I love your metaphors because that's exactly right. We are talking about a minority of a minority who have managed to secure power, and they have done it using democratic systems. So you talked about Hungary being an electoral autocracy. Well, people still go vote. In Hungary, they get to express their opinion about different things, not on LGBTQ issues, of course, because that's banned. But so the argument is, well, but Viktor Orban is being voted into office. Well, that's because he's created a situation where he can't be voted out of office, right? With same things that we experience here in the U.S., gerrymandering, demonization, banning, quashing dissent. It's all things that we're experiencing here in the U.S. and could experience more of, depending on what happens in the future. But one thing that I did want to point out, if we can, is that we're talking about the global movement, but the ties to the American outfits, the American organizations, are astounding. And so the folks that are leading the charge to really turn the United States into an authoritarian system are meeting with Viktor Orban regularly. They are sharing ideas. So it's not, we like to say they're not like the Heritage Foundation. They're not they want Trump in office, but they want to Orbanize the U.S., not Trumpize it, if that makes sense.
Yes. And Wendy Vi, for those who are not as familiar with Hungary, they know it's somewhere over there. It's over there in Central Europe. So it's sort of next to Austria. It's sort of next to Slovakia, a friend of the Germans in World War II. It's sort of right in the belly button of bad behavior. And it was certainly all under the thumb of Vladimir Putin officially once upon a time. And he is hell-bent on bringing it back into the fold. Viktor Orban runs Hungary. He is vituperatively anti-LGBT, but when you go to Hungary, you find out that he has dinner parties filled with lots of gay guys because they're very entertaining and they're great dinner guests, unlike the stuffy people that he needs to be his, battle bootmen. They're not fun to have at dinner. They don't give interesting historical reference. They don't make him laugh. So the hypocrisy is the same that we saw with Jerry Falwell, who was rabidly homophobic. And then we had Mel White write Jerry Falwell's speeches. Mel White, openly gay, even wrote a whole book, a mea culpa, about how he had brought down half of humanity for $1. So really, it always gets back to the Nixonian idea of follow the money. It's money, 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 splashing coins, gold bullion, diamonds, oil, natural gas, whatever it might be, money, power, and prestige. And the little people are allowed to vote for what they're allowed to vote for, and they think they have a lot of freedom, but they're giving away their freedom every time they're told they have more. It's a bizarre Orwellian construct, and you're looking at right in the middle of it. And I have to just say, and I'm going on and on here, so I need to shut up and let you talk, please. I'm just thrilled that it took a woman to put together your organization, because I don't see a ton of men. I'm sure they're out there, but I see women getting in and fixing stuff. So I'm wearing 3 hats. I've just taken all 3 off. My hats are off to you.
Thank you very much. I think that it is important for women to be involved, obviously, in all communities. The idea, I think, Cary, that the way you have described it and what you're preaching is that we must pay attention to this. We can't just we can't be satisfied with a vague answer or a vague instruction as to how things are going or what's going to happen. What is democracy? What is freedom? We have to stay informed, and we have to act where we can.
Coming up, we're going to ask Wendy Vai about the numerous reports she's authored on transnational, that would mean multinational extremism, and what key findings have surprised her the most, and how do they inform her work. Cary Harrison with you. This is Rethinking Heroes. We're going to pause for a second and give some love to KPFK.
Listen while it's still legal.
Rethinking Heroes with Cary Harrison. RethinkingHeroes.com.
Is Rethinking Heroes, RethinkingHeroes.com. Cary Harrison with you. Just a moment to acknowledge KPFK. KPFK is public radio on steroids. It is not the somnambulistic, though we all love NPR. I will never say anything bad. I love NPR, but you're not going to hear this stuff on here. You're not going to hear Noam Chomsky on here. You're not going to hear Chris Hedges on there. You're not going to hear much stuff on there. The range of motion is very limited, and it's always the same. They're able to go out and spend $80 million recording the sound of a trickling brook and talk about how the recipes are changing in the outskirts of Palestine. And here's somebody who's been cooking a certain something for 500 years, and now they have to use a different kind of water, and we're going to hear sizzling something, and it's filled with gravitas and feels very real. And that's kind of how they get into important stories, but they don't touch the heart of important stories because of their funding. Oil companies, Mildred. We rely on Mildred here too, but we don't have the oil companies. So what I want you to do right now is pick up the phone. I want you to know you are in the last bastion of broadcast over the air through an antenna, the strongest FM signal west of the Mississippi. This radio station providing unbelievable content that would be banned, pulled off of YouTube, blocked on Twitter X, Elon Musk, never allowed to surface, because we are talking about their core clients, aren't we? We're talking about the bread and butter of what makes Twitter money for Elon Musk. We're talking about the bread and butter for all of technology and the internet. Who's out there and who's paying and who's buying gold and whatever special anti-radiation pills, whatever they're all selling. We're talking about who those people are, and it's only happening here on KPFK. So pick up the phone. I want you to make a $100 donation right now. What does that $100 do? It not only keeps us on the air for a way longer time, but it allows this show, Rethinking Heroes, to be rendered into an audiobook every week. If you go on and wherever you get your podcasts, wherever you get them, and just put in Rethinking Heroes, up we come. And up we come also on Audible as an audiobook, banned in 5 states. Which means this show, these issues, the education that is being given here, who these people are, where they live, and what their plan is, and how that's going to affect you and your future, appears as a banned book, which means it appears in states where people need this access. This is how we are giving them access. This is like, I don't know what it is. It's like in 1933, grabbing a book that's about to be burned and hiding it in the back of your pants, knowing you'll be shot or hanged if you get caught. We sort of feel like that right now. That's why it's an important donation, because you keep this important work on the air. Pick up the phone, call 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735, 818-985-5735. Pick up that phone, make a $100 donation. You'll be asked to press 1 or 2. 1 is to talk on the show. We will be opening the phones later. Yes, we sure will. But make the one to make the donation $100, please, so that these audiobooks get out, so that this show gets distributed as podcasts. We do video, by the way. Right now, I am doing a TV show, and the audio is going through the antennas of KPFK. The TV portion we put on Facebook, we put on YouTube, we put on TikTok, we put everywhere, so that people that are under the age of 40 can also get these messages, which are so terribly important. And this is one of the ways that you get to help make that happen. Pick up the phone, call 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. Make sure if it asks you what show, Rethinking Heroes, you can also go to kpfk.org, kpfk.org, and make a secure donation of any amount you feel like. Just do it. Do it for you. Do it for your family. Do it for your legacy. Sure, you may leave a house to your children. You may leave an estate. You may leave a trust. But what you're not leaving to them, though you would love to, is a world of education. So think of the rest of humanity as your children, your proxy children, the ones that don't have the luxury of per stirpes, of being of your blood, of receiving the gifts of when you die and maybe a comfortable life. These are like regular dudes out there in driving around, maybe living in double wides or driving pickup trucks, whatever. They need to hear this message. And that's what I'm asking you to do, is pick up the phone and make sure that they do. 818-985-KPFK. Make a $100 donation right now at 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. And now back to the show.
We are in complete control. We are
Rethinking Heroes with Cary Harrison. RethinkingHeroes.com.
And it is Rethinking Heroes. Cary Harrison with you, your new best friend. Don't forget, you can go to RethinkingHeroes.com, RethinkingHeroes.com, and see the free. You don't have to do anything for it. Nothing. Zero. A wonderful documentary about Daniel Ellsberg 1 year after his passing. Never before seen conversations with him, talking about everything that matters in your life. He's written many books. He's famous for the Pentagon Papers. He did lots of talks here in LA. We were at so many of them. I knew him personally, but this is something I never saw. This was, they sat him down at the end and he went back through everything and laid out the future, augurs the future. That documentary is for free and for fun for you. Simply go to RethinkingHeroes.com. We're talking right now to Wendy Vi, a renowned expert in the intersection of technology and far-right extremism, champion for civil and human rights with 2 decades of experience in high-impact philanthropy, policy advocacy, and storytelling. What is this, after all? How do you hook right-wing goober smoochers? And I don't mean goober smoocher in a non-loving way. You hook them by telling them stories. Uncle Nettie's story time. And they believe this stuff because they need a story to explain their plight. Wendy has been instrumental in exposing hate and extremism and driving lasting change. I know we live in LA. I know we're in a bubble. I know we understand the theory of hate. It's illegal in our city. You can't do whatever you want because it's considered naughty and everyone is supposed to have protections. But guess what? Step 10 miles outside of LA, and now you've got 380 million other people that are doing what they want when they wish, and people are suffering. And the politics are changing at the speed of light. That's why Wendy co-founded the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism. That's why she has advised members of Congress, she's advised governments and tech companies to help them be accountable. Wendy, I was asking you very quickly about your, what is the most revealing thing that you have discovered in transnational or multinational extremism, and what findings have surprised you the most out of everything?
Well, out of everything, I would say that being able to identify the ways that these organizations in different countries have been connecting for years and years. It was something that we knew, but we didn't really have it documented until we did this upcoming report that you mentioned. 300 conferences, 3,000 speakers. The second thing is how willing these organizations were to collaborate on the demonization of LGBTQ people. This is, and migrants, and depending on where you are, this is the most effective way to bring people over to a far right way of thinking, because you are making that community the enemy. You're making them something to be feared. And then the far right, the actors, are the only ones who can fix that problem. And that you may hear it, when Trump says, I'm the one standing between you and destruction. It's the same kind of message and thinking. Secondly, I think the willingness to do this under the auspices of religion, that is, we are seeing a tremendous rise in religious nationalism, predominantly Christian nationalism. And it is, it's really making inroads, and it's doing it through the courts, and not just the courts here in the United States, but in the courts in Europe and in South America. And it is American actors who are taking their strategies and exporting them to other countries.
Interesting you say that, because we know that in Africa, where evangelism and evangelical training has swept Africa, where they have gone after LGBTQ people and slaughtered them. You take a look at the voodoo priest, the famous voodoo priest. We all grew up with watching voodoo movies. The voodoo priest on the west coast of Africa is loved because the voodoo priest shows up and he's the fertility god, and he blesses your family so that not only you will have crops, but the women can have beautiful babies. And the voodoo priest is a man dressed as a woman. And it is not controversial. People don't freak out. They can't wait until they get there. And so, unfortunately, you can't talk logic with people. You can't talk history because they don't know any. And this is, I think, where a lot of people who are well-meaning, probably more likely Democrats, very well-meaning, if they just had the information. But you really have to start at kindergarten and explain how stuff works. Alexander the Great, who conquered most of the known world, had a boyfriend. The Emperor Hadrian of Rome, 50 years of building libraries and temples and beautifying the entire Roman Empire, had this big boyfriend named Antinous. And what did he build in front of Zeus's gate? Zeus, the god of all gods. There is no god older than Zeus. This is ground zero for God, Zeus, Zeus, from which we get the word Deus, which means God in our Latin language, or Deuteronomy. All of it comes from Zeus, Z-E-U-S, Zeus. And Zeus has one child, the most important child. What is that child? Ganymede, simultaneously male and female, a hermaphrodite. Now, wouldn't a god, if a god thought that was not a good idea, could, wave a finger and undo that? even change history, change our memories. But the fact is, it has always been this way, and it is a source of strength. It keeps civilization going, and it's part of who we all are. But people who fall to the right, unfortunately, don't have even the fundaments of education by design, not a mistake, by design. So they're open to being told stories and to believe them, especially if it's done passionately and with lots of free beer. How did Hitler give his famous beer hall speeches? Free beer. Now, you're not taught that in history. That was a big deal. The NSDAP actually paid for all the beer in the beer halls. They would not have filled up with people watching the Fuhrer. He was not fascinating. It was not that interesting. But free beer during a depression, yeah. So he packed them, baby, all over Germany. And then, of course, Ernst Röhm, R-O-umlaut-H-M, who is the head of the NSDAP, the brown shirts, openly gay all the way up until 1931, and all 131 lieutenants that ran the entire Hitler's NSDAP, all gay, every one of them, until Heinrich Himmler decided too much competition. That guy has to go publicly. But if you don't know history and you don't know anything and you're not educated, all you know is Jesus likes guns. Jesus picked Donald Trump. That's the only way to explain him. We saw this with Rush Limbaugh, didn't we? For years. Every single show, he would say handpicked by God, with one arm tied behind his back and the other one, whatever it was. And the evidence that he was handpicked by God was that he was on the air. And how do you dispute that if you don't know? And someone's telling you they're God every single day, you start to believe it. It's advertising. 6 times with a message, 6 times, you start to believe it. You see that same car 6 times in a row, it starts to feel personal. You start to want that car. And I think a lot of this is good old-fashioned Wendy Vi propaganda, just not Goebbels style, much more elegant.
You're exactly right. I can say the examples that you just gave, if we go back to before when Hitler was trying to gain power, some of the first communities that he attacked was the transgender community in Germany. And right now, Orban gives money away to people who live in rural areas. I mean, if you have a child, you get special, you'll get a special dispensation of I'm sorry, I'm losing my words. You'll get a special payment for having children because they want to obviously increase population, primarily of white babies. But the point that you were making is that there is nothing new under the sun. What we're seeing today is what we have seen before. And the question is are we going to learn our lessons? Are we going to pay attention? But when you have very, very powerful, well-resourced organizations like Heritage, like the Alliance Defending Freedom, like Citizen Go in Spain, they have an edge when it comes to the storytelling, just as you were saying. And if you tell parents that their children are at risk because of a globalist conspiracy to spread the gender ideology, and then you point to specific incidents, you have seen it in this country, how quickly people have become afraid and laws have been passed against the LGBTQ community. And the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida, which is a mimic of the Hungarian bill, which is a mimic of the Russian bill. So we have to keep ourselves educated. We have to be willing to read stuff that we don't necessarily want to read. We can't just get our news from one source. And we have to take responsibility for what it is that's going on around us.
Well, amen to that. How do we follow your work, Wendy Vi? Where do people go to learn more? And this is an audience of learners, so that word isn't going to push them away. They're going to be like, oh, yeah. Where do I go?
Great. We are at globalextremism.org. We do have a lot of information, and we welcome everybody to go and read it and use it in their communities, use it however they see fit. We are on Twitter at Global Extremism, and I'm at Wendy Vi.
Wendy Vi, I want to thank you so much for joining us today on Rethinking Heroes. You are a hero. I don't even need to rethink you. You're just there. You're a renowned expert in the intersection of technology and far-right extremism and champion for civil and human rights. 2 decades experience in high-impact philanthropy, policy advocacy, storytelling. You've been instrumental in exposing hate and extremism and driving lasting change, which is what we all want. You're the co-founder of the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism, have advised members of Congress, governments, and tech companies. Let me just ask one final question now that I think of it. You're advising Congress. Is it because Congress cares? Really? I want to hear, yes, they really do care. Please.
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yes. And let me say this. I want to make it clear. There are members of Congress who care, who are trying to do their jobs. And for those of, and I don't want to leave out the Republicans, there are conservative Republicans who are not far-right extremists, right? Every conservative isn't a far-right person. So they do care. We have hope. We have paths to dialogue, and we will just keep working to get there.
Well, I appreciate it very much, and I appreciate you coming on. This was, if anyone has been paying even mild attention, the legacy media has even been covering this in sort of weak and sloppy ways, but at least it's out there. Now you got a focused version, so we're all better for that. I do want to thank you once again, Wendy Vi. Cary Harrison with you. We're going to open up the phones after I give a little love to KPFK, but here's the numbers. I want you to tee up, queue up, and let's talk about this stuff and whatever else is going on in your mind at 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. Open phones Friday, 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735.
Rethinking Heroes with Cary Harrison. RethinkingHeroes.com.
And it is Rethinking Heroes, and it is KPFK 90.7 FM, your voice of reason. You know, we show up here, all of us who show up here day after day, week after week, 24 hours a day. We show up here because we must show up here. We mustn't show up here because we have a contract that says we must show up here. We don't even have that. We show up because this work has to be done. And thankfully, there are enough of us in LA, and there's, 14 million is our DMA. We've got John Williams. Hey, compose some theme music. We've got everything in this town. It is exquisite. And because of that, there are enough of us around who are willing to take what we know, what we've learned, maybe years and years, for me, 30 years in radio and journalism, and volunteer it and hopefully raise the next generations to take over and keep this stuff out there, because it's being disappeared. It's being whacked. It's being pulled from YouTube. Sure, it really is. And it's not just the right. It's not just the left. It's whatever's inconvenient to the guys that want to own everything. So it's important that we all get the word out together and support each other's opportunity to do that. That's why I'm asking you to pick up the phone right now and make a $100 donation, $100 pledge to KPFK at 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. You're going to get a prompt. Press 1 to go on the air, or maybe it's the other way. Press 2 to go on the air. Press 1 to make a donation. This is open phones, so press 1 or the other. But right now, I'm asking you to make the donation. With $100, think about it. It's next to nothing in the larger world. If they take away your freedom of movement, your real freedom of speech, and you get what Florida looks like in California, where you've got guys with guns slung over their shoulders walking into grocery stores that may legally be allowed to take your life because you looked at them the wrong way. And they can defend it in law by saying, I was threatened. And banning books and the rest of it, if that goes everywhere in this country, and that is the plan of Donald John Trump, he says if he's president again, everything you know will change forever. And Vladimir Putin has created the perfect path for that. No more 4-year presidencies, 36-year presidencies, which also keeps you out of prison. It's very convenient. And he's the party of more. More beer, more barbecues, unlimited grabbing you-know-whats, whatever you want, as much as you want, no consequences, go for it, recklessness. And then somebody's at the top siphoning up the cash because you're really not looking anymore. You're just feeding at the trough. And this is insanity. 2/3 of humanity are sane. 2/3. This is why we have street lamps, why we have, flowing little rivers that haven't all been completely screwed up entirely. This is why we have airplanes that take off and land on time occasionally without a delay, maybe once a month. But this is why we have basically some kind of orderly direction, give and trade and conversation and dinner parties. Then you're going to drive home without stealing their silver because 2/3 of people are decent. It's the 1/3 that is always nuts. The average IQ of a human being is 100. And when you stoke that 1/3, that is plenty of power. It's enough to change things the wrong way forever. How do we know this? Back in the days of GMOs, you might remember, Kellogg's suddenly put a big yellow label across the box of Raisin Bran, contains no high fructose corn syrup. Now, not that anyone knew what high fructose corn syrup was, not that they knew that it causes cirrhosis of the liver, that it causes diabetes type 2 if you have enough of it. They didn't really know what it does, but they heard something's wrong. That was only 15% of America, enough for giant corporations to completely change their business model. So it only takes 15% to change anything. But when your 30% is nuts, well, this is what we're up against. So pick up the phone, call 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. Make that $100 donation right now. Help support the idea that we can render these things into audiobooks, put them in banned states, that we can have podcasts, that we can have broadcasts on the strongest FM west of the Mississippi, and that we can cover tens of millions of people who won't otherwise have access to any of this content. 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. You can also make a secure donation at kpfk.org, where you can go there right now and make a $100 donation. Now, let's go to the phones. After a bumper, but it's okay. Let's forget the bumper. Let's go right to the phones. Cary Harrison with you. This is Rethinking Heroes, rethinkingheroes.com. Let's go to Carlos in Carson. You're on Rethinking Heroes.
Hey, hi. Very informative programs. But let me ask you something. Recently, there were laws that were being pushed here in California to teach transgender values to children in schools. Now, how can that be right-wing extremism or hate speech? It's just parents. There were parents in opposition at in Glendale at a middle-class school or elementary school. They were in opposition when some of these people pushing these transgender.
Let me jump in because let me jump in, Carlos, because you need to explain to people exactly what you're talking about, where it was, and when it happened, so that we know it's true.
Gradually.
Okay, give us just one example. Would be great. Just one.
What's that?
You can give just one example. That's sufficient. One exact example. Name a school, for instance. Name the school, name the teacher.
Woman for California was trying to pass these transgender laws. And there were parents that were in opposition to it, and they showed up at a middle class school when some of these advocates for transgenderism showed up. I mean, that's one example. I mean, yet they're good.
But that's not an example. That's not at all supporting your claim.
Right-wing advocates or right-wing extremists or hate speech activists. Come on, it's just parents normally being cognizant of what should be taught to children when they're still children.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that, Carlos. Let's talk about that. So what these bills are is that you don't disinclude transgenders. It's not to force everyone. Today, we're going to do transgender, no more math, no more science, no music, no PE, nothing. Transgender only. That's what you think it is. It is not that. It's saying you cannot cut out chunks of humanity, period, as if they don't exist. Who's having transgender children? Me? No. You, my friend, you and your people are having transgendered children. You are having them. Who's having gay children? You are. Straight people. You are having gay children. So look in the mirror. Think about that. Why are you having gay children? What have you done? If you had any influence whatsoever, why are you having gay children? Why is this happening? Why is this happening since the beginning of all time? Why have you had gay children? Why?
If you don't exclude this, exclude the transgender teaching to children, the schools are going to go.
What do you mean by teaching? By teaching? What do you mean by teaching?
Because the schools are there to destabilize our countries. They're poisoning our children. They're poisoning our young generations. Come on, with all these liberalism, it's all garbage. It's all communism. Come on now, start waking up.
Okay. Let me just because I love where you're going. So communism would mean that everyone is equal, including transgenders, right?
Well, yeah, that's the issue. But really,
okay.
The bottom line, when you dissect communism, you're going to see that the benefactors of communism are the elite super capitalists created in the first place.
So Carlos, let's say your neighbor has a transgender child. Your neighbor, who you like, you go to church with your neighbor, they had a transgender child. What should happen to that parent? Should they be punished? Or should the child be killed? Like, what's your solution to this?
Well, I mean, no, you can't kill the transgender child. No, that's a crime. Let them live. But still, don't shove it down people's throats, especially parents, especially when it has to deal with children. Let them grow up. No sexual teachings of any sort should be affixed on children. Just let them grow up naturally. Play naturally until they reach a certain age where they're mature enough to start making their own decisions, to have independent thinking. Don't just shove it down the throats, which is what they're doing with these transgender value teaching in children's schools.
Quick question, Carlos. I support your opinion. So you're absolutely, and I hope you support mine. What are they teaching that's sexual? Give me the sex part, because I don't think anybody would want sex ed in second grade. I think we all agree on that. Tell us an example of the sex part that's happening, and what age are the children where this is happening? We need evidence as listeners for all of us to wrap our head around this and come to your side.
Is the concept of genderism intrinsically not sexual? Come on. It's changing your sex. Well, your biological
your gender.
Artificially, that is a sexual question, okay? And that opens up children's minds to, oh wow, I can, there's something different here. I better take a peek at it. And yet they're immature. They cannot really have rational thinking at that age. I don't mind them teaching these things
to parents. It sounds like it's to parents,
but not to children. Come on.
Well, let me ask you this. Yep. Caitlyn Jenner, who you like, Caitlyn Jenner, who's a good Trump supporter, good GOP supporter, a solid Republican, a stand-up person. Caitlyn Jenner is transgender. What should be the punishment for her having gone public like that, being so overtly sexual, photographed, being put on the cover of Vanity Fair and other magazines? I mean, are you outraged by Caitlyn Jenner, and what are you going to do about it?
I don't agree with her values, that's for sure, but she hasn't committed really any crime. There's no law against that. So she hasn't committed any crime. I just don't like the image that's sent out generally to society. Hey, transgenderism, push it to everybody, including children. Come on now, that is ridiculous, my friend. Transgenderism is nothing but a stage for a transhumanist project, okay? It's part of transhumanism, which being pushed by the elite, way at the top, the Club of Rome, the World Economic Forum. They want to confuse society and revert God's natural processes of creating different sexes so they can propagate. This transgenderism is a Trojan horse to gradually subvert that kind of what God created. You see, that's the bottom line. And of course, I'm going to be called whatever.
So I'm gonna jump in here, Carlos. I love your wonderful diatribe, and I'm gonna thank you for calling because we are running out of time here. But you yourself said, Caitlyn Jenner, nothing should happen because she hasn't done anything illegal. And I would agree with you. She has not done anything illegal. Neither has done any child who figures out who and what they are. Remember, this is a country where free expression is the law, where you have the right to self-determination. And if, Carlos, you want to put on a dress and an Indian headdress and maybe paint your toenails and drive a pickup truck and chew gum, you have the right to self-determination in America. This is the place where you get to do that. And if you don't like that, well, move to Florida and you'll be fine. I think we can squeeze in one more. Yes, Renee, definitely throw that stuff up. Renee Yerwowski, technical director, of course, put comments up whenever you feel like it. Let's do, Lance and Barbara commented on YouTube. They said, this is why we play, et cetera, et cetera. This is awesome. I appreciate everyone today. I love hearing what people really think, because in the very beginning, they're going to tell you what they're supposed to say and what they can get away with. But if you give them enough time, it all comes out. And it's just fear. It's fear of not getting what you want or losing what you think you already have, or somebody blocking it. If you get along with everyone, you're going to get a lot more. If you're nice to your neighbors, they're going to give you bread. They're going to give you food. They're going to give you stuff on Christmas. If you make nice with the other kids, your life gets big. As soon as you start to get greedy and small and clobbering your neighbors, your life gets tiny. You punish, you'll be punished back. It's just a fact. Cary Harrison with you, reminding us to please call 818-985-KPFK, make a $100 donation, 818-985-KPFK, $100 donation. Keep this station cooking. Keep the information out. You heard with your own ears what just transpired there and how people think and why they think that way. And for you to understand the core of the human psyche is to walk away with $100,000 worth of free education. So pick up the phone, call 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. Make a $100 donation, and I will look forward to seeing you next week on Rethinking Heroes.
We are in complete control. We are
Rethinking Heroes with Cary Harrison. RethinkingHeroes.com.